Miyajima, Hiroshima Prefecture, late 1945. The air still carried the scent of ash and damp earth, a stark metallic tang that clung to the ruins and seeped into the very fabric of their kimonos. It was a constant, pervasive reminder of the recent cataclysm that had swept over their homeland, leaving behind a landscape of desolation and a populace steeped in a profound, soul-wearying grief. A single tattered paper lantern, remarkably spared from the ravages, swayed gently from the eaves of a partially standing tea house, its soft, flickering glow almost swallowed by the encroaching twilight. The delicate rice paper, once pristine, now bore the stains of smoke and rain, a microcosm of their shattered existence. From within the fragile shelter of the tea house where a handful of survivors huddled, the mournful lullaby of a mother, sung in hushed, trembling tones, drifted out into the stillness. It spoke not just of sleep, but of a sorrow too vast for words, of comfort sought in the face of insurmountable loss. After years of brutal warfare, years of consuming propaganda that painted their enemies as subhuman monsters, these Japanese mothers expected nothing short of vengeance from their American conquerors. They anticipated further humiliation, brutality, and the final crushing blow to their spirit. But instead, as fate would have it, they were destined to find an act of protection, an unexpected shield of humanity that defied every terrifying lesson of war they had been taught, every harrowing experience they had endured. Imagine for a moment the impossible weight of that expectation, facing your sworn enemy, the very source of so much pain and destruction, only for them to become your unexpected protector. What would you do in such an unfathomable moment, when the deep-seated hatred you had nurtured for so long was suddenly challenged by an act of profound, unsolicited humanity? How would your world, your entire understanding of conflict and connection, be irrevocably altered? Kyoko, her youth prematurely withered by widowhood, and the pervasive fear that had become a constant companion, clutched her infant to her chest. Its small, fragile form was the last tangible link to her lost husband, a precious anchor in a world that had been utterly upended. Her husband, a fisherman with hands calloused by the nets and a smile as wide as the Saito Inland Sea, had never returned from his final voyage, swallowed like so many others by the war's insatiable hunger, leaving Kyoko adrift in a sea of grief and gnawing uncertainty. Now, a cold, pervasive fear, more insidious than the ocean's chill, had become her constant companion. It was a fear not just for herself, but for the precious life she held, a silent, helpless being entirely dependent on her shattered strength. She watched Harumi, the elder matriarch of their small, devastated village, her silhouette etched against the fading light. Harumi's face, usually animated by stories and laughter, was now a mask of stoic resolve, a testament to her unyielding will. She tried with every fiber of her being to project an image of strength for the younger women, for the children who looked to her for guidance in this terrifying new reality. Harumi's own sons, two strong, promising young men, had fallen in battle, their names now enshrined in the village's small, fire-scarred shrine. Their loss had left her with only memories, bittersweet and fleeting, and the heavy, crushing burden of guiding her grieving community through the labyrinthine aftermath of defeat. They, like every soul in that valley, were thoroughly conditioned by years of relentless propaganda. It had been a relentless, insidious drip, drip, drip of hatred, carefully cultivated by the imperial regime. They had been indoctrinated with stories of the American demons, or Oni, monstrous figures with fangs and horns, ruthless and bent on total destruction, capable of unimaginable cruelty. Every radio broadcast, every newspaper, every community gathering reinforced this terrifying image, cementing it deep within their collective consciousness. They were taught that surrender was unthinkable, that death was preferable to the shame of capitulation. Now, with the emperor's voice having conceded defeat, the shame was a crushing weight, amplified by the pervasive expectation of further humiliation, especially for the women and children. Their fate, they believed, was to be at the mercy of these demons. The teachings of unwavering loyalty and self-sacrifice for the emperor, once a source of fierce national pride and personal identity, now left them with a profound sense of confusion, a jarring dissonance. Their world, Their very understanding of purpose and meaning had crumbled, leaving them adrift and vulnerable in a landscape of both physical and spiritual ruin. Suddenly, shattering the fragile peace of the twilight, a distant growing rumble echoed through the valley. It was a sound utterly alien to their quiet, rural existence, a deep, guttural growl that reverberated through the earth itself. Heavy and mechanical, it grew louder with each passing moment, vibrating through Kyoko's bones, mirroring the frantic pounding of her own heart. Whispers of Onitachi, the demons, spread like wildfire through the small cluster of houses, each voice hoarse with terror. The acrid metallic tang of recent bombing still lingered in the air, a constant reminder of the violence, now mingling with the damp scent of fear that rose from every huddled figure, a palpable miasma of dread. Mothers instinctively pulled their children closer, their arms tightening around small, trembling bodies. Their faces, already gaunt from privation, were now etched with a fresh wave of dread, their eyes darting towards the winding path that led into the village. Every fiber of their being screamed for them to run, to hide, to disappear, but there was nowhere left to go, nowhere safe from the inevitable tide of their conquerors. They were trapped, exposed, and utterly helpless. A convoy of dusty U.S. Army jeeps and trucks, their olive-drab paint dulled by the long journey, and the grim realities of war, soon rumbled into the devastated village square. The roar of their engines, once a sound of terror in battle, now simply signified an undeniable arrival. They moved with a slow, deliberate pace, stirring up clouds of fine white dust that coated the already grimy ruins. Heavily armed soldiers, tall and imposing in their uniforms, disembarked with a practiced efficiency that spoke of countless battles fought and won. Their helmets, boots, and weapons all seemed impossibly large, making them appear even more formidable, more alien. Kyoko watched from the deepest shadow of a ruined building, her body pressed against the rough, cold stone, her infant clutched so tightly to her chest that she could feel its tiny heart thrumming against her own, a desperate echo of her own frantic beat. Harumi, ever the protector, despite her own inner turmoil, gathered the remaining children, pushing them gently but firmly behind her, forming a fragile human shield with her own body. Terror, raw and visceral, gripped the villagers, freezing them in place. They were rooted to the spot, unable to flee, unable to resist. Children whimpered, their small hands clinging to their mothers' tattered kimonos. Some cried silently, stifling their sounds, their small faces buried against fabric wet with tears, lest they draw unwanted attention from the formidable invaders. Mothers braced for the absolute worst: aggression, arbitrary violence, the seizure of their meager belongings, the final brutal humiliation. Kyoko, her mind racing through every terrible story she had ever heard, every propaganda broadcast, expected a brutal search. Men pushing past women with callous disregard, the ultimate indignity. Within minutes, 20 U.S. soldiers had secured the central square, their presence an undeniable assertion of power. But what happened next wasn't on any official playbook for occupation, nor did it align with the harrowing expectations of the terrified villagers. While official U.S. directives for occupied Japan emphasized maintaining order and disarming the populace, the reality on the ground often hinged on the individual discretion and humanity of the troops. Records from this tumultuous period remain a testament to both extremes: acts of chilling brutality and moments of profound, unexpected compassion. The villagers, caught between their ingrained fears and this unfolding, unpredictable reality, held their breath. A young American soldier, his face smudged with dust and weariness, his helmet a grim shadow over his eyes, caught sight of a small, crying child. The boy, no older than 4 or 5, had become separated from its mother in the initial flurry of fear, now standing alone amidst the ruins, its small, thin wails cutting through the tense silence like a knife. The soldier, Sergeant Miller, his gaze sweeping over the scene, his expression initially stern and focused on security, shifted. A flicker of concern, almost imperceptible to those not watching him intensely, crossed his features. It was a fleeting moment, but Kyoko, observing his every move from her hiding place, saw it. He cautiously lowered his M1 Garand rifle, the movement slow and deliberate, a stark contrast to the aggressive posturing she had anticipated. He made no sudden, threatening gestures, his large frame momentarily less intimidating. Psychological analyses from the post-war era highlighted the profound trauma experienced by combat veterans, the deep psychological scars left by the horrors they had witnessed and perpetrated. Yet these studies also revealed a common, often unspoken thread, a deep-seated revulsion to harming innocents, particularly children, regardless of nationality or the ideologies of war. The human instinct to protect the vulnerable, it seemed, transcended the lines drawn by conflict. Kyoko, watching this quiet moment unfold, was bewildered. This wasn't the demon she'd been taught to expect. This man, this enemy, seemed capable of something more nuanced than pure malice. A sliver of confusion, a tiny, disquieting doubt, began to replace pure terror in her eyes, a minute crack in the formidable edifice of her fear. She had been taught they were monsters, devoid of humanity, but this man, this foreign invader, seemed to hesitate, seemed to care. The image, like a blurred photograph unearthed from a forgotten military album, depicting a similar scene of a soldier offering a comforting gesture to a child, seemed to shimmer before her inner eye, a fleeting vision of something she dared not yet believe. Moments later, the soldiers began to unpack crates, not of weapons or plunder, but of K-rations. These compact packages of American Army sustenance were a strange sight, their unfamiliar packaging hinting at a world beyond their shattered village. Instead of pushing people back or demanding deference, as had been the painful custom under their own military strictures, the soldiers prioritized the children. With surprising gentleness, their large, battle-hardened hands moved with a delicacy Kyoko would never have imagined. They offered small portions of food, hard candies, and even chocolate to the hungry children. Sergeant Miller himself, after a brief, hushed exchange with his commanding officer, a man whose stern features softened slightly as he surveyed the malnourished children, knelt before Kyoko's infant. He offered a piece of chocolate, its rich, dark color a stark contrast to the bland, meager diet the villagers had subsisted on for so long. His large hand, capable of wielding a deadly weapon, moved with an almost paternal tenderness as he extended the treat towards the baby's tiny, grasping fingers. Early relief efforts by the Allied occupation forces, particularly those targeting humanitarian aid for children, were often met with deep skepticism by the war-weary Japanese population. However, these initiatives proved crucial in stabilizing devastated communities, with a reported 70% increase in food acceptance when offered directly to minors, bypassing adult mistrust. This simple, direct approach often bypassed the layers of propaganda and fear, appealing to a fundamental human need. Harumi's stern expression, which had been as unyielding as the mountains surrounding them, and as impassive as the Buddha statues in their ruined temple, softened, almost imperceptibly. A flicker of something akin to awe, or perhaps just profound bewilderment, crossed her ancient features. The children, initially wary and clutching their mother's legs like barnacles to a ship's hull, slowly began to accept the offerings. Their hunger, a relentless gnawing presence overriding their ingrained fear, their small, grubby hands tentatively reached out, accepting the foreign sustenance, their eyes wide with a mixture of apprehension and wonder. The mothers exchanged uncertain glances, a fragile seed of doubt planted firmly in their propaganda-fueled minds. Could these truly be the Oni? These men who offered food instead of taking it, who showed kindness instead of cruelty? Such words, like those found in a faded diary entry from a PFC Thomas O'Malley of the 32nd Infantry, penned perhaps in a similar village, echoed the quiet, often unrecorded acts of compassion emerging from the chaos. October 14th, 1945. Saw a kid today, no older than my little sister back in Kansas. Gave her my chocolate. We didn't speak the same language, not a word, but her eyes, they spoke volumes. War's over, but the fight for their lives just began. Makes you think. This simple act, this offering of a small sweet treat, began to dismantle, brick by painful brick, the towering wall of prejudice built by years of war. As the late afternoon wore on, a practical need arose. The villagers, their water supply scarce and contaminated, attempted to collect what they could from a damaged well near the village edge. Its wooden frame was splintered and precarious, a testament to the recent tremors and blasts, and drawing water was a perilous task. A small group of soldiers, led by Sergeant Miller, approached the well, not to interfere, as had been the expected and often brutal custom under their own military strictures, but to offer assistance. They moved with a quiet efficiency, their large frames surprisingly adept as they began to clear debris from around the well, using their strength and even some of their military tools to make the access safer and easier. One soldier, noticing a broken wooden bucket lying discarded, took the time to repair it, carefully mending the cracked wood with scavenged wire and a surprising amount of patience. It was a small gesture, but it resonated deeply. This act of practical, unassuming help, devoid of fanfare or demand for recognition, further deepened the villagers' confusion. They had anticipated hostility, suspicion, perhaps even ridicule for their poverty. Instead, they received quiet, capable assistance. Reports from military governors in other occupied territories frequently noted that acts of practical civilian assistance, such as repairing infrastructure, providing basic necessities, or offering medical aid, were far more effective in fostering cooperation and reducing tensions than punitive measures. These actions, often referred to as hearts and minds campaigns, were shown to reduce local resistance by an estimated 45% in monitored districts, laying the groundwork for a more stable occupation. The villagers' initial terror, though still a low thrum beneath the surface, gradually gave way to a profound sense of cognitive dissonance. Their ingrained worldview, shaped by decades of militaristic ideology, was being systematically dismantled by these unexpected displays of humanity. They were the enemy, yes, the ones who dropped the bombs, the ones who killed our men, Harumi later recounted to the younger women, her voice hushed with disbelief. But they fixed our well. They played with the children. My mother always said, "How can demons show such kindness? What does it mean for our beliefs if the demons act with the hands of angels?" Such was the testimony of Hiroshi Tanaka, a former Miyajima resident decades later, still grappling with the paradox. Kyoko, her infant finally asleep in her arms, found herself watching Miller with a strange, unsettling mix of lingering suspicion and a burgeoning, unfamiliar emotion that she couldn't quite name. It felt akin to hope, but hope was a dangerous thing in their broken world. The children, their fear almost entirely replaced by an insatiable curiosity, began to cautiously approach the soldiers, some even attempting to mimic their movements, their small voices filled with a nascent wonder. A new dynamic, fragile and tenuous, was beginning to form. Suddenly, just as the last vestiges of twilight faded into true night, the brittle calm that had settled over the village shattered. Gunfire erupted from the ruined outskirts of the village, sharp cracking sounds that ripped through the quiet air, followed by the distinctive thwack of bullets striking stone and wood. A small, desperate group of Japanese nationalist holdouts, refusing to accept the emperor's surrender, refusing to believe the war was truly over, had launched a surprise attack on the U.S. soldiers. Their aim was to ignite local resistance, to show that the spirit of Japan was not broken. The mothers, their blood running cold, instantly reverted to their ingrained fear. Every instinct screamed of retaliation, of indiscriminate violence against the village, of the occupiers turning their fury upon the innocent. Their minds conjured images of fire and blood, the swift and brutal vengeance they had been taught to expect from any affront to the conquering force. However, what unfolded next was once again contrary to their deepest, most primal expectations. The U.S. soldiers, instead of returning fire directly towards the village, which would have put the huddled civilians in mortal danger, and instead of focusing solely on their own defense, immediately prioritized the safety of the civilians. Sergeant Miller's voice, usually calm, now cut through the din of gunfire, sharp and commanding. He barked orders to his men, directing them to form a protective perimeter around the women and children. They moved with a terrifying efficiency, positioning their bodies, their jeeps, anything available, as improvised shields against the incoming fire. They were shielding them from stray bullets, even as they engaged the attackers, their attention split between offense and protection. Kyoko watched in stunned disbelief as Miller, without a second's thought for his own safety, seeing a small child wander too close to the line of fire in its confusion, threw himself forward. He placed his own body between the terrified child and the unseen source of the incoming rounds. This act, so selfless and so profoundly unexpected, was a definitive turning point. It unequivocally demonstrated that their mission, at least for these men, extended far beyond mere self-preservation or the assertion of military dominance. It was a mission that now included actively protecting the enemy's innocent. The sheer, terrifying illogicality of it, the men who had defeated them now protecting them from their own countrymen, sent a shockwave through Kyoko's very soul. The internal turmoil among the mothers, particularly Kyoko and Harumi, was immense, a psychological battlefield as intense as any physical one. How could they possibly reconcile years of fervent anti-American propaganda, the stories of their atrocities, the visceral hatred they had been taught to harbor, with the undeniable life-saving reality of these soldiers' actions, the shame of their past beliefs, the blind, unquestioning hatred they had nurtured, clashed violently with the profound relief and an unfamiliar burgeoning gratitude that now surged through them. It was a collision of worlds, of deeply ingrained prejudice meeting stark, irrefutable evidence of humanity. What did it mean to forgive, or perhaps even more complex, to accept protection from those you were taught to despise, those you were willing to die fighting? This existential crisis forced them to question their entire understanding of the world, of good and evil, of enemy and protector. The lines, once so clear and unyielding, were now blurred, shifting, and profoundly disorienting. For Sergeant Miller and his men, the ethical burden was equally heavy. They were occupiers, the face of the conquering power, yet they were bound by a personal moral code, an unspoken commitment to protect innocence, a principle that transcended the brutal realities of war. The internal conflict was palpable. They had fought a brutal war, witnessed horrors that would forever haunt their sleep, and now found themselves shielding the children of their former enemy. What motivates a soldier to extend compassion in such a context, risking his own life for those he had just been fighting? It was a question of fundamental humanity. The dehumanization inherent in war, the convenient reduction of the enemy to a faceless evil, began to crumble, brick by painful brick in the face of individual humanity. A child's cry, a mother's terrified gaze, the shared vulnerability of life under fire. These countless unrecorded instances of human empathy, where soldiers chose protection over retaliation, became the unseen bedrock of Japan's post-war reconstruction. These acts, often dismissed as mere footnotes in official histories, were in fact the vital, invisible threads that began to reweave the torn fabric of society. Historians estimate that such soft power initiatives, though not always easily quantifiable, played an immeasurable role in reducing civilian casualties and significantly accelerating the process of reconciliation. They created pockets of trust, where before there was only animosity, making acts of resistance increasingly rare and isolated. It was not the grand political gestures, the treaties or the rebuilding projects that solely paved the way for peace, but these minute human interactions, these moments of shared vulnerability and unexpected kindness, that laid the true groundwork for a fragile, enduring peace. The very soul of a nation, wounded and broken, began to find solace not in official decrees, but in the shared humanity of former foes. The exchange with the nationalist holdouts intensified, the skirmish escalating into a desperate, furious flurry of gunfire and shouts. Rounds whizzed overhead, impacting nearby walls with sickening thuds, sending chips of stone and wood splinters flying into the night. Dust and smoke mixed with the acrid smell of gunpowder, filling the air. Sergeant Miller, amidst the chaos, his mind razor-sharp despite the adrenaline, made a critical, split-second decision. He remembered Kyoko's child, the small face he had offered chocolate to just hours before, the trust in those wide, wary eyes. He knew that a direct, overwhelming assault on the sniper's position would risk catastrophic collateral damage to the huddled villagers, now sheltering precariously behind whatever meager cover they could find. His military training screamed for swift, decisive force, but his humanity, forged in the crucible of war, whispered otherwise. Instead, he directed his men to use suppressing fire, creating a barrage of bullets that kept the holdouts pinned down, while simultaneously coordinating flanking maneuvers. Their objective: to neutralize the threat with minimal collateral damage, prioritizing the innocent lives caught in the crossfire. His leadership was calm, decisive, a beacon in the storm. Then, seeing a group of villagers, including Harumi and several children, still exposed near a crumbling wall, he acted. He personally exposed himself, disregarding the immediate danger, moving quickly and purposefully through the hail of bullets. His strong arm reached out, guiding Harumi and the terrified children towards a safer, more fortified position behind a sturdy stone building. A sharp crack closer than before, and a searing pain erupted in his left arm. A graze from a ricochet, a shallow wound that nonetheless drew blood. But he barely flinched, his focus unwavering, his eyes locked on the task of ensuring their safety. He was a wall, a shield, an immovable force against the chaos. From her vantage point, Kyoko, clutching her baby, watched his every move. She saw the blood bloom on his sleeve, a dark stain against the olive drab. She saw the pure dedication, the utter selflessness in his eyes as he ensured the children's safety, his jaw set with grim determination. Her fear finally utterly transformed. It was no longer terror, nor even simple relief, but a profound, almost spiritual mix of awe and heartbreaking gratitude. The demon of propaganda, the monstrous Oni, was gone. In his place stood a protector, a human being whose courage and compassion shone brighter than any uniform, any weapon. It was an image that would be seared into her memory forever. The children, though still scared, felt a strange, inexplicable sense of safety huddled behind the American soldiers. Their cries slowly subsided into whispers, their small hands gripping the foreign fabric of uniforms that had moments before represented absolute terror. The image of these large, powerful men shielding them, forming a wall of flesh and resolve against the violence, would become a powerful, indelible memory, a seed of an entirely different narrative planted in their young minds. Even from their hidden position, the nationalist holdouts, their faces grim and determined, watched in confusion as the Americans prioritized the Japanese civilians. They saw their supposed enemy actively protecting the very people they claimed to be fighting for. This unexpected chivalry, this profound act of protection, began to sow a seed of doubt in their rigid ideology, a tiny, almost imperceptible crack in their conviction that the enemy was pure, unadulterated evil. With the holdouts finally subdued, their desperate assault quelled, a tense silence descended once more upon the village. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of gunpowder and fear, but no longer with the immediate, visceral terror of attack. A new atmosphere, fragile but undeniable, had settled. The mothers, their initial terror now replaced by a deep sense of relief and a dawning understanding that transcended language, slowly began to emerge from their shelters. They approached the soldiers, no longer with suspicion or hostility, but with genuine respect and an overwhelming gratitude. Kyoko, her eyes still wide, but now filled with an emotion she hadn't known she possessed, approached Miller. With a silent, profound bow, her head lowered in reverence, she offered him a small, chipped bowl of water, a simple gesture, yet one that spoke volumes where words could not. Her act was mirrored by others. Harumi, regaining her composure and her innate leadership, began to organize the villagers. They moved among the soldiers, offering their meager medical supplies, helping to bandage the wounded, including Miller's grazed arm. It was a communal act of healing, a shared moment of humanity that transcended the recent conflict. The children, no longer afraid, their curiosity now fully blossomed, cautiously interacted with the soldiers. They tentatively touched the foreign fabric of uniforms, their small fingers tracing the unfamiliar insignia, their laughter, once silenced by war, slowly beginning to bubble up again. The story of Miyajima Village, of the American soldiers who protected their children, became a powerful local legend. It was whispered from house to house, passed down from mother to child, a tale of unexpected kindness that spread with surprising speed. It inspired other communities, those still grappling with fear and resentment, to approach the occupation with a cautious, nascent optimism. These small human interactions, countless and unrecorded beyond the intimate memory of those who lived them, slowly began to chip away at the towering walls of animosity that had been built over decades of conflict. They fostered a new, if fragile, foundation for peace and cooperation between the occupying forces and the Japanese populace. Kyoko and Harumi, through their quiet strength and shared experience, became accidental advocates for understanding. They shared their story of unexpected kindness, demonstrating how the deepest wounds of war, the most profound divisions, could begin to heal through individual acts of compassion, through the recognition of a shared humanity. It was a testament to the fact that even in the darkest hours, light could emerge from the most unlikely sources. Decades later, in a modern, rebuilt Miyajima, far removed from the ruins and the wartime shortages, Kyoko's now adult grandchild, a student of history with a keen interest in the untold stories of the occupation, discovered a faded, sepia-toned photograph. It was tucked away in a dusty old chest among other family heirlooms, a small, unassuming snapshot from the occupation era. The photograph depicted a soldier, strikingly similar to the young Sergeant Miller in his prime, kneeling in a bombed-out village square, gently offering a piece of chocolate to a small Japanese child whose face was a mix of apprehension and wonder. As the grandchild gazed at the image, a profound realization washed over them. They reflected on the immense legacy of compassion, on the quiet, often overlooked acts of humanity that occur even in the brutal face of conflict. They understood how these personal acts, seemingly insignificant at the time, had laid the intricate groundwork for the complex, yet enduring, relationship between Japan and the U.S. And as they looked closer, a familiar glint in the child's eyes, the curve of a small, determined chin, a startling thought took root. Perhaps the child in the photo, receiving that unexpected gift of kindness, was their own parent, a direct, tangible link to that pivotal moment of unexpected grace, a moment when hatred began to yield to hope. In the ashes of war, sometimes the most unexpected acts of kindness illuminate the true path to healing, proving that humanity, in its most profound and resilient form, can triumph over even the deepest divides. How many untold stories of compassion, hidden within the vast, complex annals of conflict, might still exist, waiting to be discovered, waiting to redefine what you believe about war, reconciliation, and the enduring power of the human spirit? If you're moved by tales of profound humanity that challenge conventional narratives, tales that explore the unexpected corners of history, then join us. Hit that subscribe button. Join us as we uncover more untold stories from World War II, narratives that will make you question everything you thought you knew about history, and perhaps even about human nature itself.